Men who have sold donated sperm and gave permission for the child to contact you at 18. What is your story? I donated for 6 months in university, twice a week. I gave consent to be contacted. That was close to 20 years ago now. I did call and ask once. My sperm resulted in 24 successful pregnancies. That was all the office could tell me. I have not done 23 and more anything like that. Edit. Added a missing word. I was a donor, and when this happened to me, it was okay. 4 separate offspring at various times over the course of about 6 months contacted me, all just as they turned 18 and records were open to them. It was cool for me to see pictures of them and how much they looked like me. It was also good to hear the stories from their parents of how I helped them conceive a much needed child, which I really appreciated. But that was all. A few nice, polite emails were exchanged, some kindnesses, and then we stopped emailing. I didn't want or expect more. I'm just glad to know they existed, and that they got to connect with their biological heritage. I supposedly, as far as the donor system estimates, have a lot more out there, but I expect these are the only ones that will contact me, since I assume most of them will want to do it as soon as they can, and all of my donations happened within an 18-month span. DNA testing makes the permission difficult to enforce. My friend's dad donated in the 80s and some of his offspring recently reached out to him after DNA testing. I was donor conceived. I took a DNA test. His natural born daughter took a DNA test. So really neither of us gave permission. There are 28 siblings so far. It was quite a shock. I wasn't expecting it and didn't know. I was 38. I've met the donor and most of the half siblings. He's a cool guy. I think it is eerie how I see many of my mannerisms in him and the other siblings. I know there is a wide range of emotions for people who experience this sort of thing, but for me it was generally positive. My younger bro donated multiple times unbeknownst to me. Years later my wife and I did Ancestry.com to get an idea of how diverse our backgrounds were, and wham, started getting contacted by lots of people, over a dozen, saying we were close relatives. At first I was confused and asked the early ones about their parentage. They all had a similar stories. Single mom went to a sperm bank. Didn't take long to guess what happened. Call my brothers and asked. Younger one fessed up and said yes. He went multiple times. In fact they told him he had to stop donating because there was a statistical probability his progeny could meet and date. At least they seemed ethical. I asked if it was okay if I gave them his contact. He was fine with it. The weird thing is that they all had his face. Like one look at them and it was obvious who their father was. Anyway, this went on for a couple of years and they all connected with each other. Seems there is over 20 now. Probably more. He has met a couple of them but it was all casual. The whole thing is super weird to the rest of family to have all these close relatives who somehow are part of the family but then again not really. A guy I know in his 70s got a call from a guy in his 50s saying, "Hey, I'm your son. Oh, and I just learned I have a genetic disease, so your other kids should probably get tested." Donor for lesbian friends. Their son doesn't know yet but knows I'm his godfather. It isn't something that they will keep from him though when he asks. Obligatory not me, but I don't think I'll get another chance to tell the story. An ex-girlfriend of mine has an uncle who had donated sperm back in the 90s. At some point, he started reaching out to the parents of his biological children to see if they wanted to meet their bio dad, and now, every summer, he flies out all the children who wanted to be in contact to Yosemite, CA for a week of camping. I remember the first, and only, time I went I was shocked to know that at least 10 of his children come every year from all around the USA to spend time with him for a week. Apparently, the year I went with them was also the year that another one of his bio children got in contact with the uncle for the first time and spent the week out near Yosemite with all of her half-brothers' sisters. I don't keep in contact with the uncle or my ex anymore, but I can assume that more of his children have contacted him each year so they can spend time getting to know their bio dad. Kind of similar. I was approached by my longtime childhood friend and she asked if I would be a donor for her and her wife. I agreed, and they asked if I would be okay with being in their life, to take pictures and be around so the child knows who I am, knows I'm a friend, and also knows I'm the biological donor, etc. so there's no questions down the road. I agreed and it's been awesome so far. He just turned 2 and he's a tornado. I warned them, but he's loved more than most children will be. Coming from a background in psych, I figured developmentally it would be easier to be labeled as a friend and not an unknown. Questions of turmoil of where did I come from? etc. I guess we'll see. Edited for clarity. One of my good friends was a donor child. Her parents gave her full permission and access to the donor's information, as he consented, but she never cared to meet him or contact him. She would say something along the lines of, apart from his biological role, he has nothing to do with my life. Edit. The family had his medical history prior to the procedure to ensure no complications. No need for the apart from containing her medical history he plays no role comments. Lesbian couple I was friends with wanted a baby, but all the donors they met were assholes. In the end I said, if you want my baby gravy, I'm fine with that. You guys know me well enough and it's not like I want kids, so you might as well the wanted to pay me, so I just said put you a cute 10 in the tank of my car and buy me a bag of chips. Strangely the wee boy was born on my birthday, so that's my dad's girlfriend. Me and this kid all born on the same day. So, I'm not the dad, but a kid. So my bio dad donated sperm and gave permission to be identified. Didn't even have to be after 18. In counting. Because we're not sure if we've found all of us yet. There are 53 half siblings. All his kids. My full sister and I didn't know we were donor babies until I was a freshman in college. And her a junior in high school. It was a few more years before we found out the scope of our family. As such, I never got to meet the man as he passed away in 2018. But I've been getting to know my half siblings and I'm sad to have missed him. He apparently engaged in annual reunions and was interested in getting to know all of the kids if they, and their families, were open to it. We all support each other basically by default even though we didn't grow up together. What's even wilder about him is that he got national news coverage for something besides his giant flock of kids. The guy got married to a woman the day he met her as a competition to be his bride in the Mall of America. It was apparently a heartfelt story and the two of them had a 20-something year marriage with 4 kids that they raised themselves. The Mall of America even has a plaque with his name on it now. So you can go find him if you really try. The man was a weirdo, but in the best way. He was kind and generous with his time and really seemed to care about all of his kids. Or at least the ones he knew about. At my job we did a media interview with a guy who donated sperm at least once a month for the money throughout most of his 20s. Nearly 10 years. He recently found out that there is a Facebook group with over 100 women from all over the world that have had children from his donated sperm. Edit. This was an interview about his whole story. Not a job interview where it just randomly came up. It was for an internal video made for TV executives and writers to potentially create a TV show based off his story. I'm a child born via sperm donation. At one point in my life I did tons of research to find him. I also did Ancestry and found some half siblings but no donor. But I thought about it more and looked over the records I did have from the donor company. He was a college student at the time and asked not to be contacted. He probably has a family now who may or may not know about his past donation. And my gut feeling is that he did it for the money. So I've decided to let it go. So not exactly what you'd consider donor. But I got an ex-prego and she never told me. 10 years later I do a 23andMe DNA test and now I have a 10-year-old daughter. Scary. But I think it worked out the best way possible. Remove the link because the internet is scary. If you want the link, personal message me. Also just for fun. I also donated to a lesbian couple. So I have 2 contributions to this thread. So 2 kids under very different circumstances but they both are taken care of by their own families. I'm a donor child but the man didn't give permission for me to get in touch. I've always been a bit curious, particularly as we now do the same job. But more about any family history of disease which might be relevant. Although I assume nothing major or he wouldn't have been able to donate. I think I would have reached out when I was 19/20 but I wouldn't anymore if I had the choice. I call the donor my father but my dad will always be the one who raised me and played with me and loved me even though he died when I was young. He's the one that matters. But I am grateful to those who donate, enabling my family to have a child without a genetic illness. My uncle, who has been happily married to my other uncle for years, got one of those ancestry DNA tests as a gift. I guess it said something like you have one sister and one niece who has taken the test, as well as your son. Hold up. So my uncle had donated sperm when he was in medical school 20 plus years ago and found out he had a son through the test. They contacted each other and had a nice lunch together, and that was it. I have a friend who was raised by two lesbians but conceived by a turkey-based party, which, if you don't know what that is, I didn't either. Apparently sometime in the early 80s, a bunch of LGBTQ folk wanting kids all met somewhere in a New York apartment. The men, as there are multiple, all ejaculated into a receptacle of some kind, perhaps a turkey baster, and that product was then inserted into one of the female partners with the hope they would get pregnant. His mom used to share this story with us a lot while under the influence as we grew up. At some point, when he hit about 23ish, he did in fact attempt to find his biological dad, because he needed to know some things about his genetic health that could really only be answered if he knew the other half. And what we came to was essentially a who knows thanks to this. Apparently it would have been possible to maybe get a genetics test, but also apparently, at that point on history at least, a very good chance that incredibly expensive route doesn't lead anywhere. So he's fine just not knowing. Least last time I heard from him. Somewhat related, but I've got a brother from another mother and have a happy story to share. My dad had a kid with a lady in the 80s. She didn't want to keep it and he didn't want to be a single dad, so he was put up for adoption and they split up and go about their days. There's likely a lot more to the story, but I've only ever been told my dad's side, so I'll leave it at that. Fast forward 30 years. My dad has settled down and now has a family of 5 kids with my mom. He gets a call from a non-profit asking if he'd provide his information if his kid wants to reach out. He does, and goes about his day. Fast forward a few months, he gets a call from his son, initially wanting to learn about possible health causes and curiosity. He ended up getting adopted by an amazing family and's doing very well for himself. He wants to come to town and meet my dad. Dad has 5 awkward conversations, his kids explaining we had another brother and he was coming up to visit. Note, a running insult when we were growing up was calling each other adopted, which pissed dad off a lot lol. Fast forward 2 weeks. There was a graduation this weekend and we're having all the family over, so was a good time for him to come up and meet the guy. Great person. Hit it off and still are close with all the brothers. Everything worked out pretty good all things considered. He's a spitting image of dad and really great friend. His parents are amazing people as well. Really lucky to have him in my life. My aunts had to get a donor for both children, and he happened to live in the same neighborhood. Can't remember if that was a coincidence or not, but he is a close family friend now. He comes over for their birthdays and other family events. They don't refer to him as their dad really, only as a joke, but he is very close with our family. My wife had fertility issues and we looked at receiving a donor egg. When one was lined up, I felt I needed to donate sperm as a way of paying it forward, but then my wife became pregnant with her own egg. I feel like our good karma paid off, and our only child will have half siblings. Not me, but a friend of my father-in-law. Guy is 86 and has been dealing with cancer for decades. He lost the will to live until one day he gets a call from his supposed daughter. He was a donor in the 70s and with Ancestry.com they were able to reconnect. They were so sweet and have totally involved him in their lives. He has grandchildren he didn't know about and an entire family when he thought he would die alone. It's just a beautiful story. I get happy whenever I hear it because he is such a nice man. Funny enough, he has been cancer free almost exactly since they connected. They do say attitude is a huge recovery factor. Bumped into a high school acquaintance when Pride Week was going on. She was in town with her wife for it, and I lived in the area. We're from a small town, so it was nice to see a friendly face and we were chit-chatting. A few weeks later they asked if I could donate. I was on a free spirit sabbatical at the time, so I figured why not. I never wanted to raise children of my own and they liked my genetics. We went through a clinic and after 2 tries she got pregnant and had twins. I've only seen pictures of the children so far. I think the weirdest part afterwards was them asking if I'd be willing to donate to other friends of theirs. Apparently there's like an entire database of lesbian couples looking for donors and my email account was flooded with requests. It's what I imagine being a pretty girl on a dating app is like. I was bombarded. Without sounding arrogant, I'm 6'4", naturally thin, blue eyes, blonde hair, graduate level education, and I don't wear glasses. A lot of inquiries. It was too much and the few people I reached out to were very pushy and requesting things like I come fly to their house in Washington to do home insemination because they didn't want to pay for a clinic. Or some requesting I meet up and hook up with them and they'd tell their kid it was some dude they met on vacation. Or even some requesting I stick around to act as a co-parent cool uncle. I haven't donated since and I think the satisfaction of 2 offspring is enough for me now. A woman I went to college with reached out and asked me to be a sperm donor as her husband was infertile. I donated for 6 months but she found out she had infertility issues herself and gave up. They looked into adoption but could not afford it. I feel bad for them. You would be surprised by how much genes incorporate into your lifestyle and even mannerisms. I met my biological father when I was 25 after never meeting or seeing him my whole life. The little things were so weird. We sat in a chair the same way. We nervously bit the skin next to our fingernails at the same time. The first drink I ever ordered was a White Russian because I thought it was interesting. Lo and behold, when we met, he and his family bring White Russians to the lake because it's their favorite drink. I've kept a $2 bill in my wallet since I was 14 for no reason at all. After we talked, he has had a $2 bill in his wallet since he was a kid too. Just really weird things, coincidences. Oh hey, I can answer this. I'm not a donor, but I was donor conceived, along with my sister. Same donor. I had a great dad and never had any desire to find out who my donor was, but I was always curious about siblings. Especially when I learned there's no legal limit on how many children you can father when you donate sperm in the US. Well, 123andMe test later, and the first result on the top of the list is a half sister in Texas. We get in contact, realize we have a ton in common, and it sparked a fire in her to find more siblings. She took an ancestry DNA test and the top of that list was a man in California, listed as father. She got in touch with him right away. Turns out he's a fantastic guy. He was adopted himself and also got in contact with his birth mom as an adult. So he had been on our side of the situation and was very open and willing to talk. His wife has been super supportive of us meeting too. He has 3 organically made kids of his own. I was especially ecstatic to learn that I'm a big sister. Plus we've since found 3 more half siblings who've all been very cool and excited to find each other. At this point, I've met all but one of them in person, and I got to meet my biological grandmother too. TL. Doctor, I went from having a dad and 1 sibling to having 2 dads and 8 siblings over the span of a couple of years. It's been pretty cool. So I did actually do this. Basically I had just graduated college, my girlfriend and I needed some extra cash and I said, well, this is a cool idea. I have always wanted kids and my girlfriend can no longer have biological children due to bad endometriosis tearing up her uterus. From a purely biological perspective, I think it's kind of neat that my genetics are out there in the world possibly. As for why I said it was phone to contact me, I figure at that point it's up to the kid if they want to have any kind of relationship. And it would suck to know that someone could knowingly help create you and not only not want anything to do with you but actively prevent you from learning about them. Anyways, this was about 8 years ago, so remind me in 10 years and I'll let you know if it comes up. BTW, I do have a son. He's not biologically mine, but I still love his adorable ass. Our donor conceived might have stories you're interested in. Reads the title. Oh, this is too specific. No way, there's gonna be more than 10 comments. Just 1 hour later, 270 comments. I regret it deeply. I'm in my 20s. A family friend had been trying to get pregnant for some time but was having difficulty as she's single and in her late 30s. Good job and all that. But it's a small town and she's not very outgoing, but desperately wanted a child. So after a few years of watching her try and fail, I offered to help. Turns out my sperm are rather good swimmers, and she was shortly after pregnant. What I failed to take into account was that this would also be my first child, but not my child. And as a close family friend, the infant is over at my parents' house being babysat pretty much every day. My immediate family are the only people who know. Her family and the rest of the world are unaware and believe it to be an unknown sperm donor. It was clear from the start that I would never be known as the father to the kid. I told her I didn't mind either way she wanted to do it. So now here I am, still getting used to it, and realizing I've done something I'll regret for the rest of my life. But that is undoubtedly that best thing I've ever done for someone else. A family member of mine did this but didn't give any permissions. A buyer child, now an adult, was able to figure out who he most likely was based on genealogy websites, and the child reached out to me since this family member doesn't have a social media presence. I believe he has since contacted the buyer child, but the concern isn't this one person, but that it could be many potential buyer children in the world out there somewhere. On the buyer child's part, they now live on a different continent and appear to be a happy, functional adult who understands the awkwardness of the situation but simply wants to know more about their biological family. Totally not an answer, but my GF and I were just wondering about whether there were any protocols for how much of one donor's sperm is allowed to be distributed within a given area. Like, what could prevent two moms from having the donor's offspring in the same area and having those kids grow up and meet as teens, adults, start a relationship and realize they are related? Ask some Europeans. Even without a permission, kids have now a right to contact their biological fathers due to a new law from 2018, even if the donators strictly refuse this option. My dad donated sperm to the niece of my mom and her wife, and I got two sweet ass half brothers from that. My husband isn't a Redditor, but I'll tell our story. I'm very close to my second cousin, who is a married lesbian. When she told me the amount of coin they were about to drop for one vial of frozen sperm with a 50% chance of it working, I talked to my husband about donating to them. It was a group effort, spent about a year tracking cycles and popping over to make a deposit a few times a month. We were all about to call it when she finally got pregnant, and now has a 3-year-old. We both drew up wills and prepared for anything to happen. We will get custody of the child. He has given permission for her to contact him at any time, and we see her as cousins, but she doesn't know because we didn't want to take anything away from her other mom. I'm sure when the child is old enough to comprehend, she will be told and she can do whatever with the information. There's no expectation, and honestly he was just happy to be able to help them out. I'm super proud of him. I am on the other side. I am the product of a donor. Not really what this thread is about. But I did not get permission. Instead, I found my donor father via his brother, who is on 23andMe. I didn't find him until well past my 30s. I ended up speaking with him over the phone, and then with my donor father, and it was nice. I am apparently his only donor offspring, and he has 3 other adult children, who are all my half brothers, which is obvious, but weird. In the end, it was a disappointing experience since his wife did not like that I was reaching out and she felt threatened for some reason. On top of it, I have a difficult relationship with my real parents, and so I think I set my expectations too high going in, with hopes of forming some deeper relationship, which will likely never happen. It at least gave me closure on a very weird aspect of my existence. Not really a donor situation, but my father had a one-night stand when he just moved to the US before I was born, and the lady never kept contact and told my dad she got pregnant. So fast forward to 3 years ago, I get a call from my dad telling me a son he didn't know he had is trying to get in contact with him. My new older brother is so sweet and kind. He still calls me and he sends me pictures of my niece and nephew, and he started helping our father turn around his life. So this is actually a kind of funny story, but with an amazing twist ending. This is also not me but a friend of mine. So my friend had donated about a decade ago. Fast forward a few years and he meets this really nice girl. Turns out she was once in a lesbian marriage, conceived a child via donor, but then realized she's actually bi. Her wife divorced her soon after. She ends up chatting with my friend and they hit it off. The first time he goes over to her place, he notices that her kid looks a lot like him. They did a DNA test and turns out the donor for the kid was him. He just met his son. Anyway, they've been together ever since and are actually engaged right now and pregnant with what is now their second kid. I started donating almost exactly 10 years when I was living on the West Coast. I had only been exposed to the concept of sperm donating through movies when one would do it for gas money on road trips or when you were in dire need for fast cash. It wasn't like that at all. It took over a month and many unpaid donations to even qualify to become a donor. They did a very thorough screening process to make sure your sperm very viable and would survive the freezing process. Then they tested it to make sure you weren't a carrier of potential known diseases that could be passed down. After all of that, I started donating 2-3 times a week for a few months until I ended up moving across the country to go to grad school. I said I was open to being contacted once they were 18 and was excited about that prospect when I would be in my 40s. One day I randomly logged onto Facebook and checked my messages. I had a message request from a random person in Australia which just seemed like spam. I'm a citizen of the USA but was living in Germany at the time. Instead of immediately deleting the message, I read it and a lady explained that curiosity got the better of her and she tried to find the donor of her 2 kids. She used the little information that she knew about the donor and slowly linked the info to me. I even had TBT photos on my profile that looked like her kids. It was a match. I wasn't upset, but rather excited as I now knew more information about who and how I had helped. That was 2 years ago and now we communicate a couple times every year to update each other about what had happened in our lives. It's really exciting to see the growth of the 2 offspring that I helped produce. They're both under 10 and they know who I am, so they'll be able to grow into the understanding of our different than normal relationship. The clinic told me that I had birthed 7 children in total, so 5 are still unknown to me at this time. Overall it has been a good process and I'm really happy that I took part in it. Would do it again, and I still get emails from the clinic telling me that if I'm ever back in the area to consider becoming a donor again. My sister-in-law asked me if I would be a donor if she ever decided to have a child. I told her I only donate the old-fashioned way. She never had children but we got a good laugh out of it. Not me, but a good friend. Kids had contacted each other already, and some were siblings because the mom used his stuff several times. He met them all and everyone gets along. Seems truly good for everyone in their case. Dad is retired and road trips a lot, so when he's near one they have coffee and catch up roll. So after 1 child and almost losing my now ex-wife to a cesarean scar pregnancy, we had to go the IVF with a surrogate route. That whole situation was odd, but I ended up with my son. So weird or not, I'm happy about it. Fast forward to cheating, drugs, hidden credit cards and debt. We get divorced and one of the things we have to decide on is the 8 other embryos sitting in cold storage at the fertility clinic. After a long back and forth with lawyers, she changes her mind from destroying them to side with me on allowing them to be donated to other families that are having issues. For a concession in the divorce, I contact the clinic and I have to go in and fill out a ton of paperwork, and one of the legal releases are if the child wants to contact you upon their 18th birthday, are you okay with that? I know my ex checked no. I however went the other route. So in roughly 16-17 years I could have up to 8 kids reaching out to get to know one half of their genetic makeup, which in theory could put my kids in an odd situation. Technically speaking, they would be full siblings, having the same genes, but baked in a different oven. This story actually turned into a dating question. When I had been on like 3 dates, what would you do if we were at a store and some kid that looked exactly like me comes walking down the aisle? I was conceived by sperm donation and recently got in contact with my Sibio dad through DNA tests. He wrote an article about his experience as a donor a few months ago. I wanna meet my dad so bad, but I had an anonymous donor. So I just want to thank anyone who gave permission for their children to meet them. Trust me, it'd mean a lot.